Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. The Ravens brass in Indianapolis, except for head coach John Harbaugh, who is recuperating nicely in Owings Mills. Thank you very much. Luke Jones joins us now. You and I have woken up to some rather cold mornings in Indianapolis in late February in recent years. I saw a picture of the Radio Row that they have set up out there that is at the far end of a convention ballroom and thought, you know what, I'm just fine being here in Hunt Valley this week with you, Luke. So, but that being said, Eric DeCosta did a late morning gab session on Tuesday. You can find it in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. Really not much meat on that bone now, was there?
There really wasn't, and I think there was a little more anticipation for this, considering we hadn't heard from Eric DeCosta in a press conference setting since the end of the draft last April. It had been 10 months.
By the way, that's too long, and I call foul on that, by the way.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you there at all. I mean, I think it's pretty apparent the whole state of the Ravens thing at the end of the season has gone by the wayside. We haven't seen that full format in a few years, and we heard John Harbaugh at the end of the season, and that's it. And certainly there are questions that go beyond the head coach, questions that go above the head coach's pay grade. So I think there was more interest in that regard. And look, not very few of these general managers in Indianapolis are going to say anything of dramatic substance. Over the years, Ozzie Newsome would be good from a nugget or two here or there, but you're not going to get any major plans because a lot of this still has to play out. I mean, we're still talking a few weeks from free agency. We're still 2 months away from the draft.
Well, if Eric DeCosta was honest last year, he'd say, sure, Suggs will be back, and we'll probably get Mosley in the end, I mean, that's what he would have said, right?
Right, and you don't always know, and clearly that didn't happen. So you don't know how it's going to play out exactly, but it was very clear. Eric was very calculated, very careful in what he said, and I think in the short term, people were wondering about Marshall Yanda. Still no resolution there, although DeCosta acknowledged that they plan to talk in the next few weeks because you would think by the start of free agency they'd like to have at least a really good idea of which direction Marshall's leaning. I think that's apparent. He was asked by Baltimore, a couple Baltimore reporters in attendance about Judon, about Jimmy Smith, about Brandon Carr, who has a team option that they have to decide on, and again, it was all very, we'll see. It was all very much like we have respect for these guys. They bring value, but we have to make tough decisions. The business. So there wasn't really anything that was a strong takeaway other than typical general manager speak about young players and guys making the jump in their second year, things of that nature.
And Andy Weidel.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, when you're talking about an Indianapolis setting, you're not going to get a ton of specifics, and you do have a lot of national reporters there that are going to ask about league-wide type issues or coaches from other teams, scouts in other organizations that have moved on from Baltimore in recent years. But again, anyone who was really jonesing for some headlines, I don't think you got it on Tuesday, that's for sure.
Luke and I will be monitoring all things Orioles as well as the Terrapins of College Park and Route 1 through all this. But I want to stay on point here with the Ravens and where they are right now, where the league is right now and gathering. I think there's a little more oxygen. I talked to Gary Davenport. You can go listen to that out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault, as well as Jeff Zrebeck, our pal from The Athletic. You can listen to that. And I think when the league gets together, when there are 32 teams getting together in Indianapolis, part of the story is the Ravens were the best team that didn't win, and the feeling is, well, they're the Ravens. They got 9 draft picks. They got money. They've got a quarterback now. They got a competent coach. They have a competent GM. They've had some good drafts the last few years. It feels like they've fixed some of those things that the Matt Elams and the Brashad Perrymans, that they've gotten better than that in recent times. But the other teams, man, there are more than a handful of teams don't know who their quarterback is, right? Tom Brady may depart New England, and they won't have a quarterback. It's really Jacoby Brissett in the middle of this, and the Ryan Tannehill types, and there's a lot of conversations, and it's you can say what you want about any of these players. You can say Burrow's going to go to Cincinnati, and what's up with Tua in Alabama, where's he going to go, and all that, and that'll play out over the next 7 or 8 weeks. But there are a lot of places where there's a lot more questions going on than Eric DeCosta being asked how could they possibly lose to the Titans and still have the best football team as the season starts next year.
Yeah, and that's why there's plenty of reason to be really optimistic about the Ravens. I mean, we've talked about this from the moments after the playoff loss to Tennessee, as disappointing as it was, as devastating as it was, as empty as that week in Miami might have felt for even you and me being down there, knowing that we thought the Ravens were going to be there just a couple weeks before that. But I think that's where you do have to have some trust in a front office and a coaching staff to recognize that, hey, yeah, it was a disappointing end to the season, but this football team isn't that far. That's why when I hear, a few days ago there was a report, I don't know how reputable it was, but about the possibility of the Ravens trading Hayden Hurst, for example. When I hear stuff like that, that makes me a little more uneasy than just talking about, okay, how are you going to get better? Because I think there is a danger of trying to fix something that isn't broken here. Just because they lost to Tennessee doesn't
I don't think they're ever going to have wide receivers or tight ends in this offense who get the ball as much as they could in other places.
Yeah, well, I mean,
that's just a fact.
If you look at the volume that their 3 tight ends shared the football, they got the ball quite a bit. But to your point about wide receiver, that's kind of where I am from the standpoint of, and this is going to sound crazy because people have heard me over the years, I've banged the table about needing more wide receivers, needing more wide receivers, needing more wide receivers. Look, do I think they could add another wide receiver to the mix and make themselves more effective, make themselves more dangerous when they have to play off schedule? Absolutely. I absolutely think that's something they should pursue. That said, when I hear people talking about, the Ravens should bring in they should trade for Stephon Diggs, and look, he would be a legit number 1 for them. But part of the reason Stephon Diggs is unhappy in Minnesota is that he's not necessarily getting the football as much as he'd like at times, and that's the kind of thing that I don't think would be any better here in Baltimore. Now, I'm using Diggs as an example, but my point is...
A wide receiver X would be the example, literally.
Yeah. My point is, yes, bring in someone else that's a little more viable, a little more explosive, a little more dangerous than, say, a Seth Roberts. I'm fully on board for that. But this idea that you're going to want to try to bring in a true number 1, unless you're drafting someone who is going to be young and unproven anyway... But if you're going to bring in that veteran number 1 wide receiver and then suddenly say, well, we got to make sure we get this guy 80 catches this year, you don't want to change your identity. You don't want to lose your identity for what worked so well in 2019. Now, it needs to evolve. There's no question about that. And I just said they have to find a way to be able to play off schedule more effectively than they did against Tennessee. But you still had a record-setting offense. You still have virtually your entire offensive group of players under contract and coming back for 2020. This is much more a case of tweaking than needing to perform surgery on this roster. And I think that's where, if you're Eric DeCosta, especially on the offensive side, now the defense, front 7, yeah, they have some work to do there because they have free agents and they have some holes they have to fill and they have some improvements they need to make. That was pretty clear. That became apparent by the end of the season last year. But on the offensive side, yeah, I'd like to see them add another wide receiver that can be viable and productive, but I don't think it's their biggest need, as I've felt in the past about that position. And, yeah, they need to certainly look at the offensive line, especially if Yonda retires. I think guard becomes one of their biggest needs then. But if he does come back, then you're looking for depth. You're looking to build a deeper group of offensive line, but it's not this pressing panic kind of need. So I think with their offense, again, it's much more tweaking. On the defensive side of the ball, the secondary looks really good, other than adding some more depth, which I think will be a part of their plan. It's been their plan every year in recent years to add more cornerback depth. But I think where you do take some solace and you take some comfort is they do have an experienced front office and experienced coaching staff. And while, as you pointed out, all these other teams are trying to figure out quarterback and all these different, tight cap situations, whatever it might be. The Ravens are in this position.
Failed draft picks, right? Like literally, the Ravens don't have to show up. Everything they've touched has turned to gold. From Orlando Brown to Ronnie Stanley to Marlon Humphrey to Lamar Jackson to Hayden Hurst even and Mark Andrews for what they're trying to do. You go back to the draft history the last couple of years, they don't have to hear about, well, we got to replace Matt Elam again, or we still have to go draft another wide receiver because we blew it with Perryman, or we held on to our aging quarterback too long, or we've had 3 different head coaches around here the last 5 years. I mean, there's a lot of that going on in the halls of Indianapolis if you're a Jets fan or a Giants fan or a Cowboys fan or any of that. It's a little easier for the Ravens to get oxygen, but also for you and me over the next 2 months trying to break down the draft, they don't have these giant needs, right? Like, I mean, Yanda aside, they're going to draft a lineman, they're going to draft 2 D linemen, they're going to draft 3 linebackers, right? And they're probably going to spend some of their money figuring out those positions as well, right?
Well, they don't have a giant need on offense. Defense, they have needs up front. I mean, there's no question about that. But and we'll get to the defense in a moment. But when you talk about the offense, there's not a whole lot that they really, truly need.
Well, if Marshall Yanda walks out, and the situation they have with Hurst and where they are, and what kind of money Stanley's going to need long term, not this year, but they're going to need to draft the middle of the offensive line and find some Nico Siragusa that works out for them, right?
Yeah, I mean, and again, depth, yes, they need depth. I mean, every team needs depth. I mean, Kansas City needs depth. They won the Super Bowl last month.
They're going to need it to beat us next year.
Right. So you're always going to have that. But, again, the pressing needs on the offensive side of the ball, yes, if Yanda does indeed retire, then right guard because – okay, Ben Powers can be in the mix there, but I don't know if he's necessarily someone that they view as plan A, and you just pencil him in. I think that would be unwise. I think it is worth at least mentioning Matt Skura's knee injury and the uncertainty there as far as when he'll be back. I know he was optimistic he'll be ready for training camp, but who knows? He did have a pretty substantial knee injury, so you look at centers. So wide receiver, I already mentioned. I don't know if that's a desperate need by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly something they could really use. Let's say it, put it in those terms. So, but other than that, their offense is in really good shape, and I think there's even some upside there. There's some ceiling, a higher ceiling to tap into when you talk about Justice Hill at the running back position. When you still talk about Hayden Hurst, who was very efficient last year, and you could probably argue throw him a few more footballs in 2020. And certainly at wide receiver, I think Marquise Brown, with the news that he had a screw removed from his foot from the Liz Frank surgery that he had last year. So I think he's going to be even better. He's certainly going to be healthier than he's been, that he was in his rookie year. So I think that's encouraging. And I think while I wouldn't just automatically give Miles Boykin more snaps than he received this year, I think there's enough optimism that you want to make sure that you don't close off a road to more opportunities for him if he proves it, if he shows he's up to the task. So it's not as though there isn't some upside. And, your MVP quarterback just turned 23. And you could talk about Lamar Jackson still getting better, even if statistically he doesn't have the same kind of historic MVP season as he had in 2019. So there's still plenty of upside. There's still so much talent, so much stability on the offensive side of the ball that, they're waiting for Marshall Yanda, and if he retires, that's a blow. There's no question about that. It'd be disingenuous to try to brush that off when you're talking about a future Hall of Famer, most likely. But I think what we're talking about with the offense, for the most part, are minor tweaks and adjustments and some more evolution than anything that has to drastically be changed. Now, certainly, if we talk about the defense, that's a different story.
I'm sure we'll get to baseball and jurisprudence and cheating and scandal and players' associations, but what a strange time for the NFL and the NFL Players Association to be CBAing in the middle of February. It almost feels like the body clock's all off, and there's no way they're going to get this done right in February. What? I mean, it never happens this way. I know that there's suns and moons and stars and billions of dollars being shoved around. I find it fascinating that this is in the news this week.
Yeah, it really is, and I'm fascinated by how quickly this appears to be moving along. Now, you never say never until a deal was announced, and I think we kind of saw that last week where the owners very clearly were trying to push it on the players to say, hey, let's get this done, and then the players pumped the brakes. Even if it meant a deal wasn't getting done, they still pumped the brakes. But it is strange from the standpoint of you still have a year left on the CBA. They're still a couple years away from their current TV deal expiring. You've heard different people speculate about the election and what that could mean for the economy one way or the other, and owners concerned about that. So it really feels like they're really trying to push this thing across the finish line as quickly as they can. And they've tried to make some concessions to really appeal to the bulk of most players. I saw the increase as far as minimum salary goes and things of that nature that are really going to appeal to the masses more so than, say, your elite players necessarily. But 17-game schedule, I mean, it seems like that's something that's going to be attached to a deal whenever it gets done. We've already seen a playoff expansion is all but official, all but announced at this point to go to 7 teams in each conference. So it is interesting, and I keep coming back to much smarter people than me, like Andrew Brandt, for example, who's said on multiple occasions over the last week or two that if I'm the players, I'd be really concerned about a deal that the owners seem so excited to get done this quickly. But, hey, I'm not the one making a decision here, but it's definitely strange when you consider the climate for this compared to what we were talking about 9 years ago with the lockout, with the Hall of Fame game being canceled, with the possibility of losing preseason games and being right up to the 11th hour as far as getting something done. Much different timetable for this time around, and perhaps the next time you and I are talking, a deal will be official and finalized.
He is Luke Jones, Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. Anything else kicking up here as we get up on really the free agent deadline? It'll be Judon from the Ravens' perspective that we're all talking about, right? But I think Tom Brady's the one the league is going to be talking about and how it shakes out for quarterbacks and what that means for quarterback seats around the league.
Yeah, I mean, just to touch on the Ravens again briefly, I do think they have a lot of work to do with the front seven. I think that's, I don't want to say dire, but I think it's pretty clear they need to do some work. I mean, I don't think you can count on another in-season patchwork kind of rebuild that they were able to pull off last year. I don't think you can count on that happening again. So they have some work to do there. With Judon, the question is going to be whether they franchise tag him or not. I don't foresee a long-term deal getting done before they at least have to put the tag on him for a short period of time, at the very least. But we'll see how that plays out. And the window begins this week for teams being able to do that. You mentioned Tom Brady. I think it's funny. You mentioned earlier in the conversation about where other teams are right now in terms of not having a franchise quarterback. And I think Tom Brady's such a fascinating name in this discussion because let's call a spade a spade. Tom Brady's 43 years old. Any team that's looking to bring him in at this point, unless you feel you just have such a good roster everywhere else and your quarterback has just been holding you back, period. And I don't even know who that team would be necessarily. I mean,
Jacksonville.
Maybe, but even Jacksonville.
He ain't going to Jacksonville, but I mean, you're asking me for a team that had a team at one point before they gave away Ramsey, and before they showed again that they don't know what they're doing, right? So
but that was 3 years ago when they were at that point. So now I look at it and
who needs a quarterback right now is what you're asking, right?
Right. And that's where I can't help but feel if you're looking at Tom Brady, how much of it is football related, and how much of it is a business opportunity.
Giselle related.
When you look at the Las Vegas Raiders now, for example, who are going to a new market, Derek Carr has kind of, sort of, at times looked like he could be the guy, and other times hasn't. And, he's making real money, even though that deal isn't extremely prohibitive.
He looks like he went 7-9 with John Gruden last year to me.
Yeah. So, but I look at that, and I still look at Tom Brady and say, are you really signing this guy because you think you're getting the guy that's won all these Super Bowls, or are you signing this guy to create some buzz? And that's where and look, do I think Tom Brady could go back to New England and have one more year with the Patriots, not necessarily winning the Super Bowl, but they're the top 3 seed in the AFC and playing a home playoff game and getting to an AFC championship again? Sure, because they have a system there that's worked. They have a Hall of Fame head coach, and there's enough in place there where if they add a couple more playmakers like they very clearly need to do, then I could see it. But Tom Brady being dropped into another situation with a different head coach that he doesn't have the same rapport and trust with a different front office and ownership group that he doesn't have the same rapport and trust with, I don't know. That doesn't feel like a recipe for success to me. But if you're a team like the Raiders, like the LA Chargers, who are so desperate to make a footprint in their respective markets.
Yeah, they're not having the Eric DeCosta press conference in Indianapolis.
Right, they're talking about how can we create some buzz? How can we
matter? Dude, yeah. I've been to a Los Angeles Chargers game. I've spent time in LA.
There.
It's really, yeah, man, yeah, dude. Yeah. You better. Do you remember when the Ravens didn't matter here? Right, when they came to town, they had purple pants, and the Orioles were all the right. It was just trying to matter, right?
Yeah, so that's where I think the Brady thing, as much as people keep talking about how much he has left, and look, I have those same questions. I don't think their issues on offense were remotely all about Brady, but to try to say that he was the Tom Brady of 5 years prior to that, no way. I mean, it was clear that there's age there. It's clear that there's some significant graying going on there.
Avocado ice cream can only do so much.
Right. I mean, it's already extraordinary what this guy has done.
Look at what it's done for me.
Yeah, it's already extraordinary what this guy has done, even through his age 42 season. So at some point it comes to an end. It's just the reality. And that's where the Patriots are weighing this from a much different standpoint than, say, the Raiders or the Chargers or whoever, whichever team out there. I mean, I guess some people have thrown Indianapolis out there as maybe that would be the team where you'd say, well, that roster is pretty darn good. They had injuries last year, but is Tom Brady better than Jacoby Brissett at this point? I'd say still probably, although I wouldn't want to make that as a long-term bet. But that's where I think it's so fascinating with him specifically, how this plays out, where the market is. Does he indeed decide to walk away? Is he prepared to walk away? It's one thing to put feelers out and to say, yeah, I'll talk to this team or I'll negotiate with this team or I'll listen to this team over here, but you're still talking about someone with a pretty remarkable legacy. And while it's true that, yeah, Joe Montana went and played in Kansas City, Johnny Unitas couldn't finish his career with the Colts. You go down the list, there have been plenty of even the all-time greats who finished their career elsewhere. Joe Namath comes to mind. Lots of guys. So there's nothing that says that Tom Brady must finish his career in New England, but he also is keenly aware of what the history of the league is and how it turned out for most of those guys at their final stop. So it'll be interesting. If there's truly that team that blows him away from a financial standpoint, that it's so much more than whatever New England might offer, does he in fact decide that? But that's very clearly the talk in Indianapolis. That's not related to the draft. That's the biggest talking point, I guess, other than the CBA, of course. But as far as veteran players, he's the talk of the league for the next few weeks, and it's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. And even if he does leave, again, I'm going to be really interested to see how much of that ends up being just some buzz and some attention for that new team, much more so than how effectively it works out from a football standpoint.
You don't think Dan Snyder would like a bright, shiny object, do you?
Well,
or Jarrett. How about Jarrett?
I would say this. Ron Rivera is a grown-up, so I'm guessing they're gonna stick with Haskins at least for the time being. But who knows? Yeah, it'd be hilarious if the Cowboys decided they don't want to pay Dak Prescott, and then they decide to pay a 43-year-old Tom Brady. I'm not expecting that, but boy, would that be funny, and that would just be that'd be the cherry on top of Jerry Jones' ridiculousness.
Well,
I don't expect that, but yeah, I guess you have to talk about them as much as any of the other teams out there for even a small percent chance of it happening.
Did you ever read The Big Game by Mark Leibowitz, or did you not?
I did not get a chance to.
Yeah, well, there's the point where Jerry's falling out of the Cowboys bus in Indianapolis at 4 a.m., so you want to read that part, because it's timely. It's 4 a.m. in Indianapolis this week, and the Cowboys still stink all these years later. You can find Luke at WNST.net. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. He is always monitoring our WNST tech service, brought to you by Coons Ford Security Boulevard. And, of course, Dennis will be here on Thursday from 3 until 5. Luke joins Dennis. I join Dennis. We all join Dennis. We appreciate all of our sponsors around here, including our friends at Planet Fitness that bring you the morning newspaper each and every morning at 7 a.m. You sign up for that. You get it every morning. It's free. It includes our Baltimore positive stuff. Back at State Fair this week. Back at Fadley's next week. We're going to get Sheila Dixon next week. We're going to give her equal time to give her hour. We're going to hear from Frank Kelly next week. Ted Venetoulis this week. And we have a special event on Tuesday, April 14th. I'm hoping you write that down on your calendar from 11 to 1. We're doing a special one-year anniversary luncheon for Baltimore Positive, and we have a very, very special event with the election season coming up, so stay tuned for that. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.